Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Thursday, January 20th, 2022 Board of Education regular meeting for Lincoln Way Community High School District 210. My name is Aaron Janik. I'll be running the meeting tonight in the absence of President Kostick. As President Pro Tem, President Kostick will be joining us via phone. If you could please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, can you please call the roll, Ms. Stone?
Mr. Janik?
Here.
Ms. Janice Doyle? Mr. Kirking?
Here.
Mr. Lacine?
Here.
Mr. Lucetti?
Here.
Mr. Kostick?
Here.
Mrs. Stokes?
Okay, our first order of business is student council presidents, and we'll just start and go left to right.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Lincoln Way Central Student Council.
Oh, can you hit the little button with the person with them?
Thank you.
There we go.
On behalf of Lincoln Way Central Student Council, I would like to discuss some of our recent events and student atmosphere. To begin, leading into our finals week, PPS teamed up with Student Council and created a de-stress before the test week in order to help students as they prepared. With this, each day there was a specific event or activity to calm students and relieve tension. Also, the Student Council sold candygrams. Students were able to buy 2 candy canes for $1 and write a message to be delivered to their friends. Our participation rate was outstanding, and all of the funds went to a local charity. To continue, following break and going remote for students was a rough week as many people struggled with the learning. However, many students are very excited to be back and in person. With this, our winter sports will soon be coming to a close as our teams have been doing great in their seasons. Some recent athletic accomplishments include our boys bowling team placing second at regionals, our girls basketball team has won the Sandburg Holiday Invite Championship, and our wrestling took second place at the Lincoln Wrestling Tournament over break. In addition, I would like to discuss the student atmosphere and give insight into the students' perspectives. Currently, our seniors at Central are going full-blown into scholarship season with many colleges sending acceptance letters, and seniors are using the general scholarship application Central has provided as well as the many other scholarships listed from our PPS. Our juniors are also preparing for the SAT coming this spring. Juniors are utilizing all of the school's resources by attending the meetings before and after school and taking free practice tests as well as utilizing Khan Academy. Our students are also heading into course selection for the upcoming school year with the help of PPS and upperclassmen recommendations. Therefore, Central students have been filling the halls with a positive attitude and are looking forward to spring and further upcoming events. Thank you for your time and have a great evening.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Peyton Lamphere, and I will be presenting on behalf of Lincoln Way East as Student Council President. After an unexpected delay in returning to in-person classes following winter break, students at Lincoln Way East are back and hard at work both inside and out of the classroom. After wrapping up first semester, our freshmen, sophomores, and juniors must start thinking about course selections for next school year. Throughout this entire week, an elective fair is on display during lunch periods. Students can learn more about certain electives that are offered to help decide what courses to take for next year. Also, our winter sports teams are currently rolling through this season. All teams are preparing for upcoming conference and sectionals. We look forward to seeing all the successes of our sports teams and hope for some state qualifying teams as well. Lastly, we are so excited to be able to host a Mr. and Miss Griffin Show this year for our seniors. The show will be held on Saturday, March 5th. Although twerp is not a possibility this year due to COVID restrictions, our student council will be decorating the cafeteria as well as hosting a spirit week leading up to the show. For ticket sales for this event, tickets will go on sale beginning the second week of February. Students will have the opportunity to purchase tickets during their lunch hours or after school, as well as before the event. Tickets must be bought with cash only and will be sold $10 per ticket. We are so excited to put on this show and find out who this year's Mr. and Miss Griffin will be. Thank you for your time and have a great night.
Good evening. My name is Emma Stiglick, and I'm the Student Council President at Lincoln Way West. Last semester, our Warriors were remarkably busy across athletics, activities, and academics, closing out a successful first semester. Our athletic department had a great fall season, with many sports teams sending their athletes to the state-level competition. In addition, our music department was quite productive this fall. They hosted an outstanding Madrigals concert, as well as another wonderful Winterfest. Also, our students from the music department ended the semester caroling in the Wrigleyville Christkindl Market at the Bean in downtown Chicago. We are proud to say that students from the AFJROTC program participated in the Wreaths Across America ceremony at the Abraham Lincoln National Cemetery. Along with balancing activities and athletics, Warrior students worked hard reviewing for finals exams. To support our student body during this busy time, Lincoln Way West hosted a variety of Warrior wellness activities before school. Currently, the second semester is already underway, and the Warriors have started out the semester strong. There was an elective fair held last Thursday, the 13th, which gave students a chance to preview what classes they want to take next year. Along with this, our freshmen, sophomores, and juniors will meet with their counselors to plan their classes for the 2022-23 school year. Furthermore, our theater company is busy preparing for our Black Box Winter Play, in which we have 8 senior directors who are working with their cast for the upcoming show, taking place at the beginning of February. Our athletic teams have been competing in the SWSC conference, and many of them are currently getting ready for the postseason. These teams have given us many victories to celebrate. First, we would like to congratulate the varsity and junior varsity dance teams who took home a win for our Warriors at the SWSC Championship Conference meet last Wednesday. They will now compete in their sectional meet this upcoming Saturday. Second, our boys bowling team recently advanced to their sectional match taking place this upcoming weekend. Third, on our girls basketball team, junior Ava Galuza has scored her 1,000th career point for the Warriors. And finally, another incredible accomplishment is that senior Katie Nash received a 36 on her ACT. We look forward to what the semester will have in store. Thank you.
All right, thank you, ladies. Best of luck this second semester. We have no one signed up for public comment, so we'll move right into our presentations. First up is curriculum instruction and assessment update.
Good evening. Tonight, Dr. Fear and I are going to highlight some items regarding our school report card, our standardized assessments, and academic interventions. As we begin, I'd like to remind everyone about our previous school year, specifically as it pertains to students in our buildings. This information has had an impact on our school report card, as we'll see in a few moments. As we begin to look into metrics in the school report card, it's important to keep in mind that approximately 20% of our students attended school using our online learning platform last year, while all others spent approximately 100 days engaged in remote learning, both synchronously and asynchronously. The school report card was released in late October, with various data elements not appearing until December. This report card is another non-traditional report card with a number of data elements not being included, such as science proficiency, college and career readiness, and a summative designation. The entire report card can be viewed online at illinoisreportcard.com, and today we're going to focus in on a couple of areas. As we look at the data, we always like to compare ourselves with the surrounding school districts. On the screens that follow, you'll see a variety of comparisons, including just Will County high schools, Lincoln Way comparable high schools, and schools that were also deemed exemplary back in 2019. First, our district graduation rate remains at a high level of 97%. This has been consistent for at least the last 5 years. Our graduation rate is among the highest when compared to other high schools similar to Lincoln Way. Along with our graduation rate is our 9th grade on track, currently at 94%. We will continue to work with our students that have been deemed not on track to help them through graduation. SAT scores were unavailable for the 2020 school year, so we were unable to compare ourselves to others last year. This year, the scores were delayed, ensuring the state captured the results of as many students as possible. This slide compares the SAT scores of Lincoln Way with other Will County high schools, represented by the bar graph, and also represented on the graph is the funding capacity of each high school. As you can see, our high schools continue to outperform all other Will County schools while operating at approximately 67% of funding capacity. That's the percentage of local funding received to adequately educate our students. This next slide compares the Lincoln Way High Schools with other high schools that received exemplary status in 2019. As you can see, we continue to keep pace with other exemplary schools in terms of our SAT test scores. As we compare to past results, you can see that even with the unique school year our students had last year, they continued to grow and perform at a high level. If you notice from the PSAT that the students took in the fall to the SAT that they took in the spring, we continued to grow, while overall the state took a decline. One metric that's been mentioned in the past is that of evidence-based reading and writing and math proficiency. This metric is based upon students reaching a performance level set forth by the State Board of Education, and it is one of the many metrics that helps us to identify success in student performance. The graphic on the screen represents all Illinois high schools depicted by a red dot, and their performance on the 2019 and 2021 EBRW proficiency. The yellow line running through the dots represents meeting the same level of performance in 2021 as the school did in 2019. A dot below the line means the 2020 performance did not meet the same level, and a dot above the line means the 2021 performance outscored the 19 performance. The blue dots represent each of the three Lincoln Way high schools. As we look at this information, we can see that across the state, most of the higher performing schools did not perform as well in 21 as they did in 2019. This chart shows the same analysis but with the math benchmarks. Similar to the EBRW benchmarks, most of the higher performing schools performed at a level that didn't quite meet the 2019 level of performance. Across the state, that pandemic has had an impact on the SAT performance of all students. Using the Lincoln Way comparable list of high schools, we can see where our three high schools fell compared to those in the area of evidence-based reading and writing. All three Lincoln Way high schools performing at a level that is much higher than the state average, which is in the green. This is a more detailed comparison of the 2019 and 21 benchmark. The difference between the two assessments varies from school district to school district, but all high schools on this list had a higher percentage of students meeting the benchmark in 2019 as we did in 2021. Once again, using the Lincoln Way comparable list of high schools, we're looking at our performance in math, and all three high schools performing at a level, once again, much higher than that of the state average. As we compare the 2019 and 21 performance, we notice that the same trends as we saw in the EBRW. Student preparation is one area in which we will continue to be able to help our students achieve a level of performance similar to the results of 2019. Our current students had not been exposed to an SAT style of assessment since the fall of their 8th grade year. Familiarity with the SAT and the style of questioning gives our students a better sense of what to expect when they finally take the SAT in the spring of their junior year. Earlier this year, the board approved providing our current 9th, 10th, and 11th grade students with an opportunity to take a PSAT. These assessments were given in September and October, and the results have helped us to identify groups of students that need some additional support to reach the benchmarks set forth by Illinois State Board of Education. As a part of this suite, our students will then be participating in the state-mandated assessment in the spring. We are going to continue to work with our students throughout the year, using the information gained from our PSAT assessment, as well as other assessments, in order to help our students reach the benchmarks set forth by the state. Now, Dr. Fury will go into greater detail regarding the interventions that have taken place and will continue to take place throughout the school year.
Well, good evening. So the second part of our update tonight is going to focus on the academic interventions and support that are in place for our students. As we all know, we returned to full in-person learning this year after a year of remote and blended. Our teachers last school year were able to provide our students with the full curriculum, so incomplete learning and curriculum gaps were not our first concern. However, the extent to which each student acquired the content and skills became our first priority for this school year. First, we began by looking at each incoming freshman and identified those who may need additional support in the areas of math and reading. Each of these students were then placed into a year-long targeted advisory with a math or reading teacher who would provide additional support and instruction in order to be proactive with their academic needs in these areas. By targeting these freshman students, it's our intention to get them off to a strong start and hopefully circumvent any gaps in the future. Identifying and supporting these incoming at-risk students has been something we've done for years, and this year was no different. Something different we did do this year, however, was to also identify the current students who, due to the remote and blended learning school year, may not have acquired as many skills or as much content as they should have. In order to identify these students, each of our core areas of math, English, social science, and reading all administered diagnostic assessments during the first 2 weeks back in August. Using this diagnostic assessment data, teachers and department chairs developed whole class, small group, and individual remediation plans for the identified content and skills that needed review or reteaching. For example, our algebra teachers developed a Unit 0 that addressed the areas of need for our students, providing students with extra instruction and support right at the beginning of the school year in order to address the deficits that were exposed in the diagnostic testing. In addition to addressing the skill deficits, Unit 0 also provided all students with a foundation for future success in upcoming units. It rebuilt student confidence in learning math, and perhaps most importantly, it acclimated students back to full-time in-person learning. Another example was within our English department, who had teachers at every level use the diagnostic data, particularly in the area of passage analysis and writing, to create a remediation plan and embed additional instruction and practice in targeted areas throughout the school year. After each of our core departments had analyzed their diagnostic assessment data from August and had developed their plans for whole class review and reteaching, further intervention was also planned for targeted students as well. Based on the assessment data, students were identified and referred to one of the academic support opportunities available to students, including Math Center, Writing Center, Academic Assistance, all intervention programs available to students during their advisory, which have been part of our academic programming for years. But in addition to these supports, our associate principals went even further and targeted even more students with additional support and intervention and created several new programs to address the needs of this particular school year. For example, at East, the after-school assistance program was developed, and students by referral were placed into targeted tutoring after school, where they were supported by teachers in each of the core areas, or even the Mind the Gaps program, where students were provided 2 to 3 week content-specific assistance where skill gaps were specifically identified and remediated. At all 3 buildings at the end of the semester, final exam study skill reviews took place for both freshmen and sophomores this year, as sophomores were experiencing their first high school final exams as well. All of these supports and interventions focused on the academic needs of our students in this first semester and will continue and even be supplemented after final exams, and as Dr. Murphy mentioned, the PSAT reveal any other further academic needs of our students. And finally, looking forward to this semester, as mentioned, the PSAT and SAT preparation plans are already in the works. Students have already been provided their PSAT scores. They've been previewed of the test prep opportunities to come, which include online resources, as you heard from our students, before school, after school, and during advisory, as well as direct instruction that will take place in the classrooms. More information on the full PSAT and SAT prep and programming is to come in the spring. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy.
Mr. Lewis, I believe, just stepped out of the,
Keynote speaker just stepped out. He'll be right back.
can we move ahead with the consent agenda and come back to him?
Good.
All right, why don't we give Mr. Lewis just a few minutes? But with that, we'll move ahead to the consent agenda. Let me just get to it real quick. All right, so we have the approval of the regular meeting minutes of December 16th, 2021, approval of the closed meeting minutes of December 16th, 2021, approval of the payrolls of December 20th, 2021, January 5th, 2022, and January 20th, 2022, personnel reports. Would anyone like any of these items pulled? No? All right, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Here a second? All right, Linda, can you open the vote, please?
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
All right, and we'll circle back now to the second presentation we have on the agenda is the debt restructuring update with Mr. Bob Lewis from PMA.
While Bob gets settled, he obviously presented debt restructuring scenarios to each of you in November, and you asked for additional information, including different term lengths and a scenario without the 0.5% cushion that had been built into those financials. So he's here tonight to present updated scenarios and get your guidance. He'll also provide information with a forward delivery option. I did want to highlight that since our November meeting, we inquired if Moody's might review the district's rating at this time, given our continued financial improvement. They were not willing to do so, so we felt it was in our best interest prior to this board meeting to reach out to another agency, and so we contacted Standard & Poor's. If the S&P were to award our district a higher rating, it would materially impact the financial analysis that Bob and his team did prior to this meeting tonight. And I'm pleased to report that S&P did, in fact, issue Lincoln Way a higher rating. We received an A+ stable rating, which, if you're looking for a comparison to Moody's, would be about 3 notches higher than where we were in December of 2020, which is excellent news. And that has been baked into Bob's analysis for tonight. I do want to highlight no action is required of the board in tonight's discussion, but we are asking for explicit guidance from you just with some of the timeline pieces that Bob has to do prior to February, and that's twofold. One, does the board wish to abate money? And if so, to do so on a permanent basis or recoup that later through the restructuring process? And then two, in that restructuring process, are you interested in extending the debt 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years? And so with that, Bob, I'll turn it over to you to walk through the financials.
Thank you. It's asking for a pin. Oh, sorry.
You're good.
I can't hear.
No,
No one's saying anything right now, Joe.
sorry.
Oh,
So-
okay. That's fine. Just want to make sure.
So this presentation has some slides that I'll just skim right over because you've seen them before, but I wanted them all in here for context in case somebody ever looked at this one separate from the prior presentations. So quickly, a market update. You may recall that this is an index of the municipal bond market that we use to monitor trends. It's not meant to be where one particular issue would borrow, but it just gives you an idea what direction interest rates are going. And since I was last out here in November, if you focus on the dark blue line, which is a 10-year rate, that approximates the average life of your remaining bonds, that has been trending upward as a result of really the correction that we've seen since the beginning of the year with worries about the Federal Reserve policy, inflation, and other connected events. So this slide is your board objectives. I'm not planning to go through these again. We've talked to them before. I think all the board members are familiar with them. And this slide gives you a representation of what Mike was just talking about with the different ratings. Moody's still has you a Baa1 with a positive outlook. Now it's been 2 years since they did their surveillance, so we were very hopeful that you would have moved up at least 1 notch. But they were in no hurry, as Mike indicated, to do their surveillance. So we went to Standard & Poor's, and they assigned the A+ rating. There's still more, if you read the report, there's still room for improvement even on that rating. They just want to see a few more years of the consistent improved financial results of the district. So, the natural rating, I think, where you could probably end up at, once everything is, normalized, and it's been that way for quite some time. Would probably be in the mid-AA category, AA, maybe a AA plus, but so there's definitely room to see that move upward even more. This is just a summary of the district's outstanding bonds. The ones that are refundable on a tax-exempt basis later this year are the 2013 A bonds. And as a reminder, those aren't callable to January 1st of 2023. And that means any financing that we do on those bonds, we want to close that within 90 days. So that brings you back to October. So that's what really drives the timeline about when you can try to lock in the interest rates and close on that refunding bond to reduce the interest rate on those bonds. This is just a summary of your debt service. So now I'm going to go into the scenarios. We have relabeled these scenarios from what you saw in the prior presentation because a lot of those scenarios have been removed. So the 1A is the same as the prior 1A, but what was 1B was dropped. So 1B, 1C were relabeled one letter earlier. So the variations on 1A, 1B, and 1C are 1 year or 3 year extension, 2 year extension, 1 year extension. And for this analysis, we're using the feedback from Raymond James, who the district has used as his underwriter based off the selection via the RFP a couple years ago, and post receiving the S&P rating. So this is what was estimated just a couple days ago in the current market, assuming we didn't sell the bonds to August and nothing changed. And so a 3 year extension would level out, go up a couple more years. Levy year 21 would be for the taxes collected next year. And then it would level off at right around right around, I wrote down the wrong note here, right around 26 million, a little bit more than 26 million. And scenario 1B would level off right around 28.1 million. And I'm going to come back to 1B in just a moment. And then scenario 1C, where there's only 1 year extension, would continue to rise for a few more years and then level off just above 30 million. Now, this is going to give or take a couple $100,000 depending upon interest rates and the timing. But the picture, though, would look very similar in all three of those scenarios. So 1B, what's interesting here is it's leveling off right around 28.1 million. If you were to go back and pull up the presentations at the end of 2019, beginning 2020, when we did that first financing, at that time, interest rates were higher, your rating was lower, and we had estimated at that time that a 3 year extension would level off at 28.5 million. So that peak that we had a couple years ago is the same peak roughly that you get with only a 2 year extension this time. So just to provide some context of the improvement in the interest rate assumption, what that does as far as the peak relative to the extension. So this slide here, there's a lot of numbers here about the impact of the various scenarios. If you were to just pick, for instance, scenario 1B and look at the bottom column, we estimate that the total debt service, even with in this case, the 2 year extension, would still go down by about $18 million. Back in November of last year, if you go to the next slide, slide 14, just look at that same number. Debt service is going down, but only by about 11.8 million, our estimate. So there's an improvement there of about $6 million, or roughly $5 million on a present value basis. And it's roughly the same when comparing the three scenarios, 1A, 1B, 1C. So this improvement is in spite of the fact that interest rates have gone up. It really goes to the fact that, interest rates have gone up, but when I gave you that analysis in November, I had the 50 basis point cushion. So essentially that interest rate increase ate the 50 basis point cushion. But in spite of that, because of the higher rating from S&P, which is factored into the underwriting desk at Raymond James, that's what caused the overall increase in savings between now and then. So this last slide here looks at, well, what if you did a forward delivery bond? Just a reminder what that means. So a standard delivery would mean if we have to close October 5th, normally you would be able to close 4 to 5 weeks in a standard delivery. It means you wouldn't be selling the bonds until late August. So you'd be having market risk for about 6 to 7 more months if we waited to do a standard delivery. But what if you could, and I touched on this in November, what if we could set the rate now and close in October? We call that a forward delivery bond. The estimated penalty in a public offering, so when I talk about public offering, that's a bond where an underwriter takes the bond out to the market and sells it to their investor clientele, which is a whole host of different type of municipal bond investors. If they were to do this as a forward delivery, the estimate is the yield would be about 0.35% higher for the flexibility to price it now and deliver later, which makes sense. You know, you're asking your investors to take that risk, and the result is you're still better off. If you look at that at the bottom of the scenario 1B again, the reduction is $14.2 million, which is not as good as it is if nothing changed and you waited to deliver and do a traditional timing for the closing. That one was $17.7 million. So again, 14.2 versus 17.7, but that 14.2 is still better than what we had estimated back in November at 11.8. So the questions now that direction that we need from the board, the administration, and PMA is the board interested in doing the forward now to lock in its interest rate risk? And, you know, due to some favorable indications we've gotten on some other options, we really like the board to strongly consider doing the forward and also be able to give us direction on these other questions tonight. I can't go into all those details right now at this moment, but the economic conditions and a potential placement are favorable to the district, such that it may want to accelerate this timeline a bit. And then the other decision points, as Mike indicated, were, do you want to do a 1-year, 2-year, 3-year extension? Because if you're going to do a forward, all that gets locked in now. You can't decide later on to go from a 2 to a 3 or 2 to a 1. That decision, we really need to know that tonight. And then the other is with the abatement. I think it was indicated by the board in November that you wanted to reduce the levy by the $2.8 million. The remaining question was, would we then reimburse that essentially when the refunding closes, or would that abatement stay permanent? So essentially the refunding would end up being roughly $2.8 million less in issuance, principal issuance. And if you're going to do a forward, that answer would have to be known now and couldn't wait to be decided until later on. Here's a rough timeline. Now, this is subject to change based upon some additional developments that have occurred since I provided this presentation a couple of days ago. But it's probably a good time to pause and to see if you have any questions about the questions that we have regarding the extension and the abatement.
Any questions for Mr. Lewis?
I mean, one of your questions was, would we be interested in the forward delivery? I still think that, from my perspective, you know, handing off the interest rate risk for 35 basis points in a environment where we don't really know where interest rates are going, but it looks like, you know, the Fed's going to raise interest rates here 3 times. I mean, some of it's been anticipated by the market, but so I would be interested in that. I mean, is that more of a option now that we have the higher rating?
Yeah, because we were a little uncertain with the lower rating, how much interest there would be, and we're confident that's no longer an issue. So, yeah, 35 basis points, and perhaps with some other developments, it could be less. I think it'd be very prudent to try to lock that rate in. Just for some context, today we for another large school district in the state who had another 100 million plus financing. We took bids on a forward placement today, and they came in from one of the particular bids came in much stronger than we even anticipated. So we think their board will approve that on Monday.
How does that process work? A forward delivery, how do you start it? How does you get the bids, et cetera?
So the bids and the discussions have already taken place informally. What we need to do it formally is, and to accept those bids, is for board action to approve a parameters resolution similar to what the board did back in 2019 for the bonds we did in 2020. With that parameters resolution, what that does is it sets forth a not to exceed issuance amount, not to exceed final payment. So if you decide on 2 years, for example, we'd make the final payment a 2-year extension, not to exceed interest rate, and then the board president and the board superintendent would be delegated, or the assistant superintendent of finance would be delegated the authority then to approve that sale, as long as it met the threshold of being somewhat close to what we're showing you here.
So maybe is the deal you were just talking about, is this part of the strategic meeting on Monday before the Fed? I mean, is anyone going to take bids now and, see what, if they had a surprise 50 basis point move or something like that?
Right. I mean, that wasn't, the timeline we put together for this other one was just how things were falling out, because our discussions there began around the same time of the presentation with you guys, and their board made that decision when I met with them in early January to proceed. So it's more of a coincidence that the Fed meeting is that same week. But that does play somewhat into, a lot of what the people are expecting the Fed to do is baked into the market, but the Fed could surprise. That is developing soon, maybe a 50 basis point increase by March. I don't think we'll see anything in January. That would be a big surprise, obviously.
Right.
But that's part of the reason why I think the forward delivery idea has a lot of merit for you, because there's a lot of risk in the market. If you've been following what's been happening since the new year, the Treasury market has just been going up.
Are you asking us?
Have most indications been that the Fed is going, at least what I've heard, at least raise rates at least 3 times this year? And if it's 25 basis points each time, and we can forward price this for 35 basis points, the forward pricing seems to make the most sense. I think the question becomes extending 1, 2, or 3 years. And that's my opinion.
Yeah, but part of that's baked in, because that's the consensus, right? So
Absolutely.
the market moves before the Fed. But I'm in agreement, Joe. I think,
The upside risk is great.
the upside risk right now is great, and for 35 basis points, I think it's worth it to lay off the
That's
interest
what I
rate
mean.
risk.
If it's only 35 basis points, it seems like a good risk to take. But again, you and Joe are more well versed in this than I am.
And that 35 basis points on the high, and some developments that suggest that it might be even lower.
If you do it from an absolute value perspective, the upside's much higher than where we are to 0. Mm-hmm. So you know what your downside is, but your upside, and we're talking, Joe mentioned just Federal Reserve options. There could be geopolitical or other things that happen that could send this thing off the rails. Inflation has been steady. It doesn't seem to be temporary as people were kind of predicting. My question was going to be, so what, right now we're having a discussion. You're asking us to do what again? There were 3 decisions, and I was trying to write them down.
Yeah, one was the timing.
Right.
The other one is the length, a 1, 2, or 3 year extension.
Okay. Define timing for me. Say that again.
What the timing that do we want to move ahead with trying to implement this in a forward delivery transaction versus waiting till August like we once thought? And if we had waited till August, some of these decisions, like on the length and the abatement, could have been made then. But now, if we're going to do it forward, those decisions have to be made now.
Extending, how long do you want to extend? 1 year, 2
No,
years?
that part,
or
I
3
was the
years?
timing part of it that I wasn't,
Yeah.
I thought I understood it, but I just wanted to make sure. I mean,
So
obviously, the
in
interest
terms of
rate-
the forward delivery, I think I'm kind of on that same path as well.
Well,
To do
okay.
to do the
But the
forward.
question would be, like, we don't know what the forward delivery,
Right.
opportunity is right now. He could come back and tell you forward deliveries at, a much higher rate because they're considering the things Joe just brought up.
Right, but if we decided tonight to go forward with the forward delivery, we'd start down that road tonight, right?
You'd set the parameters.
Yeah, we would set the parameters for me to go back to advise the attorneys on what to bake into a resolution. And then we begin the process until the delegates would sign off on it. So if the market went south before the deal could be signed on the dotted line, you could always decide to change your mind. It's just a matter of, do we go down, start that path?
What does south mean?
Well, meaning like, the market gets really volatile, all of a sudden the forward premium goes up, if what I'm saying tonight, all of a sudden the dynamics of that change a lot, you're not locked in tonight if you say, let's do a forward, okay, that's gonna happen no matter what.
Can you give us an example of the parameters we would be setting?
The parameter would be, I think there's roughly $136 million of principal to be refinanced or something along those lines. So the parameter would be, we're not gonna do more than that, which you couldn't legally. You're just refinancing bonds. You can't issue any new bonds. The key one from my perspective is the length of term. Are we gonna have the final payment be in 2034, 2035, or 2036? And not to exceed interest rate, and those are the main parameters that need to be determined. The abatement is more of a direction than a parameter, because the parameter is going to be would probably be set at a par amount that would allow that to happen either way.
When you're saying set the interest rate, because there's going to be different maturities on this, are you setting what you want as like the average?
No, it would be like,
or is it like a set interest rate?
Yeah, the not to exceed interest rate is, because when you sell the bonds in the market, if the public offering, you're going to have a different interest rate and then a yield assigned to each one of those and be sold at a premium or a discount.
Right.
And usually that interest rate, we determine it was higher than what you see in the market because a lot of bond investors want to buy them at a premium. If we go the direct placement route, you may recall I talked about before, the bank just buys it, they usually just set one rate, just like you would with your home mortgage or a car payment.
Oh.
And it's done at par, meaning there's no premium or discount, the rate's the rate. And in that case, that rate would be much lower than the maximum we'd set in the parameters. The maximum rate's not as important as the other variables. We just don't want to put something too low that we can't proceed.
Are there any other key considerations that we haven't asked that you would disclose on doing that, a forward version?
Right.
I mean, does it lock you into anything in the future that you can't do, that if you did a public offering that you'd be able to do? I don't know.
The forward delivery, like if it's done as a placement, there are a couple of, the ones that we've been doing on some of these other entities, they have some of these common terms that are a little different than a public offering, and try to make it as plain apples to apples comparison. For example, if you sold in the public offering, the rate's the rate. If you ever had some issue with taxability, the IRS determines something happened and it needs to be taxable, the IRS usually will demand some sort of payment to keep it tax exempt. I'm not expecting thing like that to happen. In these placements, usually what happens is baked into the documentation is, well, if the IRS ever determines your bonds are taxable because of something the district did, then it will convert to this rate. So that's a little different, but I don't see that as being a materially different term. Also baked into it is a covenant or a rate lock agreement. So for example, if you got to August or October and it's time to close and you say, you know what, we don't want to close this because now we think we can get a better deal in the public offering, well, you'll have to make a mark-to-market payment to make them even for breaking the loan. That's not in a traditional bond issue. And those are, pretty much the only differences between waiting to do the normal type of public offering and doing this as a forward.
So I think you just answered my next question, was what happens in this period before the call date? And it's basically, we'll have a contract in place.
Yep.
And they'll, if for some reason you wanted to break it, which I don't foresee, but you would have to pay them. They're basically locking in their earnings on it, or interest.
Right, yeah, because they're gonna put a hedge in place when when you guys
Yeah.
sign the dotted line.
What about potential defeasement from the sale of a major asset? How would that impact?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and one of the things that we were talking about today, what I would consider doing are two things. One, you do what's called a make-whole call. So let's say 2 years from now, there's a sale of a major asset and you get X amount of dollars in, that a make-whole call, so like a traditional bond issue, as you've seen here, they're not callable for several years, so you'd have to wait until you got that call date to pay down the bonds. So this forward would have that sort of traditional par call, but we would also add a make-whole call. So if you got something earlier in 2 years and you wanted to pay down X amount of principal, you could do so, but there would be a payment made, again, a mark-to-market payment, that compensates them for those bonds being retired early. We just exercised that type of provision on another bond issue for another client, a large financing. And that would be better than the alternative of getting that money and just having it sit there until you got to the call date. And indeed, because those are tax exempt bonds and you got that money.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, I mean, because those proceeds came in, those were connected to the issuance of tax exempt bonds. So there's some IRS rules that have to be followed on what you do with those proceeds, and having that make-whole call provision would be very flexible in dealing with those IRS tax covenants.
Can you put, and we discussed this previously, can you put out a tender offer for your bonds in the market?
Yes.
If you have a sale in 2 years of a major asset and you have cash, can you put out a tender offer?
Yes, you can put out a tender offer. They may or may not see it. We actually are doing a tender offer on another bond issue right now. And what I was just describing as a make-whole call would be something to be baked into a direct placement where you have one bank owning the bond. And that's one of the advantages, I think, of the direct placement is you'd be dealing with one bondholder. This is a multiple in a public offering.
Right, I'm talking about on our other, we have plenty of other bonds to choose from.
Yeah, but these other bonds they're callable at the end of this year, so it's not really much benefit to trying to do a tender offer now. Because rates have come down so much, we barely have to touch your non-callable caps. And most of the non-callable cabs that we have to touch are the ones later this year, which we're taking care of doing that on a tax-exempt basis through this abatement arrangement.
Would the sale of the major asset have to be applied to the bonds, or could be?
That's a good question. It's getting into some areas of, tax counsel would have to talk about that. And so you can't hold me to what I'm saying here. I know when I've heard these conversations before, typically what I hear is that the proceeds would have to be used to pay down the tax exempt bonds or be redirected to other capital related projects that'd be eligible for tax exempt financing. So.
What if they were just held, period?
That, I don't think you could do. I think if you got it back, you have to pay down debt or essentially treat it like you just did a new tax exempt bond issue and spend it on capital. You can't just put it into your operating funds.
Would you be allowed to put it in Fund 60 until?
You have to remind me what funds.
So that would be your building and capital, so that would be your capital.
I mean,
Because
Those-
wasn't part of this bond capital improvement?
Correct.
The entire bond was capital improvement, so, yeah.
And then the addition that we dealt with, correct, Joe?
I guess where I'm going is if the bond hypothetically has a 2% coupon, rates are at a point where you can earn 6% in a money market, the 4% spread becomes
Right,
income.
right. Well, then you get into some of the arbitrage rules
Right.
under the IRS, so these would be all good questions for Angelique.
Sure.
So, which we can ask, you know, if you get to that point, it'd probably good to get a memo. Maybe they've written a memo in the past, I'm not sure, about what your options are in the event that you sell a major
And
asset.
again, this is all, we're into
Right.
la la land
Yeah.
now, so it's like.
Bob, as the advisor, you've done a really good job outlining everything. I think it would make sense if you would kind of give your, your perspective. Obviously, from what you're saying, you think the forward is the way to go right now. From your perspective, kind of knowing where the numbers are, I think it may be beneficial to at least provide some guidance to the board in terms of 1, 2, or 3 years based upon what you're saying. I think you went back to year 2 being better than our original year 3 plan.
Right.
So that might be something to discuss. And then the abatement question, from an administrative perspective, we can always use capital money, but yet at the same time, if this helps fit this plan to move forward, I think that's something that the board needs to strongly consider, and we can kind of put this into place to begin the discussions for the immediate future, as I think time is of the essence if we do this forward.
Right.
So
Yeah.
as the advisor, go ahead and kind of give perspective and then answer some questions if you can.
Yes, so if I were sitting in one of your chairs, I would definitely strongly consider doing the forward. I would probably move towards the 2-year extension, just because it's similar to what originally you had signed off on in a concept plan, except it's 1 year shorter. The only reason maybe you'd still want to do the 3-year plan is if you look at this graph here, the 3-year plan levels off in 23, no more increases after that. The 2-year plan would level off 1 year later. So that's really the only negative of that compared to the 3-year plan. But this is what the old 3-year plan looked like, as far as where you peaked off at. So I would do the forward placement, probably do the 2-year plan, and knowing that as a school district that doesn't have a debt service extension base, that has several years remaining on its debt, so you have limited access to funds to provide for capital, I would abate the debt service as we plan for this plan of finance, but then reimburse yourself so those funds would be available for capital improvements. That's just my opinion about those dollars and their potential uses.
And when we abate and you say reimburse, when would that money then become available?
Yeah, so mechanically, what the resolution, the way it would describe that in the resolution that you'll see here in not too many, and not too distant future, is the amount of the abatement. I've seen it in our presentation. One place says 2.9, another says 2.8. I think it's 2.8. Those funds are set aside to paying agent on your bonds. They're the firm that sends you your invoices. It's still part of the fund that those dollars came from. So let's say it's the education fund. So it's now as if you're holding a $2.8 million investment in the education fund at the paying agent. And then when the bonds, so this escrow agent will tell the paying agent, if you receive no additional funds by January 1st of 23, use this $2.8 million to make a portion of the bond payment due that date. If the refunding closes in October as planned, the escrow tells them to send that money back to the district for you just to put into your normal investment funds. That's how it's reimbursed. It really never leaves your funds, or never leaves your fund account or funds of accounts. It's just where you're keeping it, and it's restricted as escrow until the bonds close. If you wanted to make it permanent, we'd still be setting it aside with the paying agent, but then when the bonds close, that money, along with the bond proceeds, would be combined together to pay down the old bonds.
Any other questions for Mr. Lewis? Okay. Do we need to have a
We
further?
need, so at this point, I think publicly, you just need to kind of gain consensus. As Bob had said, whatever direction goes, and we're going to talk through this over the next couple of days, everything will be brought back to the board for a final look and approval. So what's happening what's happening now is putting together the bid sheet, for lack of a better term, and getting it out to see what we can get. And he has to be able to have, yes, we're going forward, yes, it's gonna be X amount of years, and then this will be the total amount of the bonds. So I think we need to do that, and the board needs to give some direction now, so that Bob can take that back to our underwriters, and they can go to the market, and then bring that back. And then.
Do we need a motion of some sort, Scott? or-
We would not, just need a direction at this point, Mr. Costick.
Okay.
Need a decision on, yes, we're gonna go forward, how many years, whether or not that abatement is permanent. And-
So I would be forward 2 years and reimburse the 2.8. That's where I would be at right now.
Okay, so,
Change my mind, Chris.
no, I'm not, no, forward 2 years, yes, so let's get to the abatement. Why do you have to know if it's gonna be fully, if you're gonna abate, no matter what, do you have to know if you're gonna reimburse to get a bid?
Yeah, because
Because you're gonna have.
Because
an
you have to
outstanding
know how
loan.
much principal we need in the bid.
Yeah.
Because if it's gonna be permanent, it'd be 2.8 million less than principal. If it's not permanent, then it'd be 2.8 million more.
So part of this abatement too, and I don't know where this has gone, but right now we're showing, or we put it into the budget, and it's coming from the operating funds and then can be transferred out. But part of it, when we initially started talking about this abatement, part of it was going to be funded from the interest that had been accrued in the bond account or whatever. What's the fund number?
Right.
Yeah, so,
Yeah, interest that accumulated in the debt service fund over the years.
right, yeah. So that was like, and we had gone through a whole process where I think Brad had come back to us with a number that he felt was obviously, because there's, the timing mismatch on when these things have to be paid. But I recall that number being over $500,000.
Right, it was the excess interest.
Yeah,
So
so why would we permanently abate that money? So I'm just starting at that level
You're
first.
saying go less than the 500 then, to 2.3?
No,
Fund only 2.3 versus 2.8.
well, I'm starting at an abatement of 500,000, I'm working my way up. So, with that money, why wouldn't you abate that if we can?
The 500.
The 500, yeah, I'm starting there.
Yeah, because if it's interest earnings in the debt service fund, that can actually be used for interest earnings can be used for any purpose. It can be abated to another fund. If it was actual tax collections in the debt service fund that are extra, those can only be used to pay debt service.
This is interest.
So this is interest, so it can be, what are you saying, abated to any fund, what does that mean?
So a lot of school districts would take that interest earnings debt service fund and you could abate it to the capital projects fund and use it for capital projects. Because it's not considered restricted from a state law perspective.
Okay, I didn't remember that from previous, did we talk about that?
So we could permanently abate the 500,000 if we chose to do so.
Well, I mean, I think what he's saying is you can also
I
put
get
that
it.
into capital
It has
projects.
discretion, but.
Right, yeah, there's discretion.
But
yeah.
we've got a budget that doesn't have that in it, that, again, part of the
Well,
idea was to keep this as short as possible.
Well, our budget has a full abatement, not
No, I mean,
getting
the
refunded in it.
500,000.
Yeah, that's not in there, yeah.
So, right.
Yeah.
But
But,
the budget is 2.8 is what you're saying.
right.
So the 500,000 is nothing, so
We-
get closer to 2.8.
Right. we budgeted for an abatement.
Right.
And not to have it be refunded.
Correct.
That's where I'm at.
And I'm gonna keep playing chess here because there's another item that's pending out there that creates capital that isn't in any of these numbers right now. It's a little more imminent than the other major asset sale that I was referring to.
So if we, so going off that, we could pick a number.
Well, that's why I was trying to get him closer to 2.8 without it being the full 2.8, because there is wiggle room now that exists.
So I got a question real quick. How much flexibility, so forward-looking years, and then the abatement part, if we know we're doing abatement, and when do you actually lock in where we can come to you and say, here, that number's gonna go from X to X, and that's gonna be the real number? I mean, how much flexibility do we have on the abatement?
Well, as soon as the bonds are sold, then it's got to be known. So
Right, but that's later in the year. I'm saying, do we have 60 days, 30 days?
perhaps less than 30 days.
Okay.
But maybe even less than that based
Okay.
on some developments, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, I suppose, I don't like this option, but I suppose that if you weren't sure and you still wanted to wait, you could price the forward assuming you would make it permanent. And if you decided not to make it permanent, you could always do a small refunding bond later on to reimburse, you know, but that, I don't like that option.
Yeah,
I,
it's just like, I think you're gonna have to have a vote of the board, at some point to get that guidance, because I think there's differing opinions.
the thing is, I think to put the numbers together, to bring back for a term sheet, I think at this point, it makes sense to say forward 2 years, abate the 2.8 million, knowing there may be some other revenue sources in the future, but that 2.8, with what you talked about, Chris, the possible use of the interest on there, plus some possible other, revenue, we would be able, the district would be able to do that. The administration's very comfortable moving forward with this type of number, particularly what it could potentially do to the debt structure, which has been a goal of this board for quite some time. That would be, at least from the administration perspective, if we did forward 2 years, let's go the full 2.8 and then work it back in as we work through our budget and through our fiscal year.
No rebate, no return.
Correct, just leave it. That-
I mean, I think you can even call it 2.3, because you can take the 500.
5 off, we could do 2.3 a permanent abatement, 500, then we could recapture out of the interest because we know there's at least that much there.
We have a 5-year forecast that bakes this all in. That's kind of where I'm going here, is that we've been playing this out in that manner, and then I think we stay the course.
Okay.
Okay.
Forward 2 years, 2.3 abate, and it stays permanent.
I could live with that. I'm okay. Joe?
Yes,
Costick?
I'm in. That sounds good.
Rich, I mean, we're not voting here, just
No,
just kind of
No,
taking the
I
temperature.
think I'm in for that. I'm in for those parameters.
I
Yeah.
think Chris here, Beth? Okay. So I think that's kind of the directive of the board.
Okay, that's perfect, thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, so moving back to the action, or the agenda, the action items, we have the presentation of invoices for December 17th, 2021 through January 20th, 2022.
Motion to approve the invoices in the amount of $4,191,069.53 dated January 20th, 2022.
All right, any questions?
Second.
Thanks, Joe. Any questions? I just had one. There seemed to be quite a few HVAC and related services on some of the bills. Was that related to the chillers at East?
Rich, seasonal repairs for HVAC, were any of these bills related to the chiller replacement at East?
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't get to the
question.
Yeah, I should have shot you an email, so apologize.
We've not yet paid in bulk, though, Chris and I were talking about that earlier.
Okay.
We've not seen the large expense for that chiller getting shipped up on a temp basis.
Okay.
That's not in here yet, no.
Okay. All right, any other questions? All right, hearing none. Linda, can you open the vote, please?
The vote is open.
Thank you.
The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
All right, next up, we have the treasurer's report for December 2021.
For the month of December, we received $6.7 million in revenue, and we spent $25.1 million. The total cash balance at the close of the month was $33.9 million. So through the end of December, we are at the halfway point of the fiscal year. We're through 6 months. And so approximately 50% of our budgeted revenues have been realized, and approximately 58% of our expenses have been realized. And for sake of comparison, at this point last year, that was 51% revenue and 44% expenses. Now, the significant difference there is simply the January 1st bond payment that was due, that was $17.5 million. Because January 1st fell on a weekend, we made that payment on December 30th. So that hits this month. And so I want you to disregard that, because excluding that, we had a very favorable month. And a month from now, through the end of January, we'll be back aligned with the prior year. Excluding that bond payment hitting early, the district had a positive cash variance this month of roughly $380,000. And then looking ahead, right now our estimated cash balance at the end of January, I anticipate that to be $29.4 million. And again, for sake of comparison, at that point through the end of January last fiscal year, it was 22.9. So we're $6.5 million to the better is where I estimate. Take any questions if you have them.
Any questions? Oh, all right, hearing none. Linda, can you, or do I have a motion? Need a motion, I'm sorry. Do I have a second? Second. All right, any questions? All right, hearing none, can you please open the vote?
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
All right, next up, we have the student activities report for December 2021.
Student activity report for December 2021 is in your backup materials. My computer is slow to load, but I know there were 3 activities that were in the negative. I know one was girls' basketball, possibly bowling, and one other, but I would just ask you to approve the activity report as presented in your backup materials. Everything will be, all 3. We've spoken to the coaches and sponsors, and there will be no negatives at the end of next month. I'd ask you to approve as presented. Still not loading.
All right, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right, any questions? All right, hearing none. Linda, can you please open the vote?
The vote is open.
Bowling, basketball, and buddies.
The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
All right, our next item up under the action items is our second reading for the 2022-2023 school calendars.
So we added an option B to the school calendar. I didn't listen to some people last year who might have foreshadowed a little challenge coming back from break. And so what we've created in option B, we've moved finals back one day. So we'd go 2021-22 for our finals. We would then take off on the 23rd. We would be off the week after Christmas, and then we'd also be out the week after New Year and return on the 9th. Had we done this year, would have provided us a little relief. We don't know what next year is going to look like, but this gives everyone 2 weekends. It gives us that potential relief there, that first week of January, if, yep, just in case. So those are the adjustments. the teachers would like this as our semesters, this is more balanced than it's ever been in terms of 86 and 90 for those teachers that teach the semester courses. So out of the two options, the administration met on this last week. We would recommend option B to provide us that flexibility and potential relief coming back from winter break. I would entertain any questions that you may have.
There was no movement or discussion on the spring break being, they didn't care about that? I know you
There,
said you
there
were gonna talk to
wasn't
them.
because the feeders have all kept it there. And if we went opposite of the feeders on this one, it would be, we'd have some phone calls.
Gotcha.
Some of the feeders are gonna take that entire week of January 2nd. Some are gonna come back the 5th and 6th, and knowing that some people may extend their vacation. But the spring break, they wanted to stay there and keep it within that week.
Any other questions for Dr. Tingley?
So the feeders have already said where are they at in this?
On spring break,
No, on after the holidays.
after holidays, I know New Lenox 122 approved theirs this week. They're coming back the 5th, Thursday the 5th, so they are taking a couple extra days. We have an institute that first day, as many districts do, so it just made sense to go ahead and bump it to Monday, to be honest. Also provides us a little flexibility with transportation. If one or two of the feeders come back on the 5th, and not everybody's all back in. The remainder of the feeders will start on the 9th, where we'll have an institute, so that also provides us a day.
Predicting major snow that week.
All right, any other questions on the calendar?
So
So
we would
motion, need a motion, option B?
Option B.
Option B. So the motion would be to approve option B of the school draft calendar.
Which is the administration's recommendation.
Yes.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Thanks, Joe. Linda, can you please open the vote?
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
And Joe Costick, we're getting a little feedback on your phone. Maybe you could mute until you have need to say something.
Sure.
Okay, thanks. All right, next up, we have informational items. We have report of the Lincoln Way Special Education District 843 Governing Board meetings held December 14th, 2021.
Nothing additional to report. The minutes are in your backup materials.
FOIA requests,
There are none for this month.
building and grounds report.
Once again, included in your backup materials, if anyone has any questions, Mr. Wilkie is here.
Rich, I did have a couple. Do you have a moment? Just looking over year, can you give us your assessment? You know, it seems to be up significantly. I think I know why, but I want to hear why you think why.
The short answer is the buildings are fully open this year, where last year, the first 6 months, we were either remote or hybrid. So that's the short answer. Within the categories, there are a few outliers, like natural gas. We know it's very high right now. And cleaning service, we're down quite a bit due to a labor shortage. But overall, if you compare 22 to 20, the last time we were fully operational, the difference is about 4% rather than that larger difference.
Good, thank you.
Welcome.
Appreciate that.
All right, first reading, elementary transportation intergovernmental agreement.
Sure, so the next two items I'll talk briefly about tonight, and then they'll come back just for a vote at the February meeting. As you know, we have transportation services intergovernmental agreements with all the feeder districts. New Lenox District 122 expires at the end of this school year. Both districts have expressed an interest in extending that, and so this draft IGA attached to this agenda item does just that for 5 more years. District 122 admin brought this to their board this past Tuesday for a first read, and then both districts would be requesting approval in February.
This is the same agreement that we've used in years past with them?
It is. There's really no material, some language. I did seek a little bit of counsel from CLIC just to update some liability insurance numbers and some different language, but it's not materially different at all.
Does this cover like any of the challenges we've had with attracting bus drivers, retaining bus drivers, training bus drivers? Is that all, that cost included in this agreement?
All transportation costs are split proportionally out to the districts, yes.
All right, moving on, we have first reading school bus lease agreement.
Yes, so this is then the subsequent lease. So we have 158 buses through Midwest Transit right now, and one of the things that Brad did was stagger the IGAs with the feeder districts and then stagger the leases so that we weren't having them all come due at the same time. So we have 48 buses up. Typically what we would go do is we would go procure 48 brand new buses, nice and shiny. Last year, it was very cost prohibitive, and so Brad got refurbished buses, you may remember, a year ago. This year, vehicle prices have increased substantially again. New buses are up 60% from the last time we got new buses, 24 months ago. Refurbished buses are up nearly 20% from this time last year. And so we then said, well, we'll just keep the buses we have. Can we extend the lease for 1 year? And that was a 20% spike in price as well. So after getting those numbers, of course, we then sought out some alternative quotes from competitors, and I will tell you that unfortunately, they were in the same ballpark. New buses might have been a little bit less and refurbished a little bit more, or vice versa. And so none of these were really feasible or going to be recommended by us to you. And so I want to give the transportation team a great deal of credit. Mr. Leone, Nina, Laura, and the mechanics, and we've brainstormed a different solution here. So thank you to each of them. But we've come up with 3 key factors that I wanted to highlight for you because this lease that we're going to ask you to approve next month is a little bit different. Because that bus driver shortage that we've been talking about still persists, and we don't think that's going to fix itself overnight. We have a lot of spare buses right now that are not being used, and we do not need to lease 48 buses just because 48 are up. And that's going to save a lot of money. And so we assessed, and we're very confident that by either extending or getting 30 buses and reducing the fleet by 18, we can make that work for a year. And if we're fortunate enough to recover that labor shortage incrementally over the next year, then the following year we simply lease a few more to right size if necessary. Second, we went back to Midwest and said that 1 year lease is not okay, but if you would go out 2 years, how can that bring down the price? And they came through on it. They were at about $10,500, $10,600 per bus per year, and they came down to $9,200. And so the 2 year lease was a good solution for us. And then third, we did a pretty comprehensive data analysis, and we've decided not to pursue a full warranty on the buses. The current buses that are up, we're going to recommend extending for 2 years, but only get the engine warranty, not the body and chassis. We feel very strongly it's more cost-effective to just pay as we go on the body and chassis repairs. And so when we compare that business as usual approach, getting 48 new buses compared to what we've come up here, we're very confident in this recommendation, and our district stands to save more than $1 million, and that's inclusive of the feeder districts over the next 2 years. So I'll be finalizing documentation with Midwest and bring that to the February board meeting with approval, but I wanted to share what I believe is a very positive update in a tough and volatile market right now, and I anticipate we'll save a notable amount of money for both us and the feeders.
We don't anticipate those numbers coming down at all?
I don't.
No, I don't.
No.
Being a little facetious.
So do we have any data on how much, whatever we're not going to have the warranty on anymore, body and chassis, do we have any data on how much work we've needed in the past and what the potential cost could be?
Yes. So what we did is we looked at this very specific fleet, and this fleet of 48 buses has extremely low miles, just because of COVID. And I mean, we weren't running the buses for a pretty significant amount of time. And these buses were the ones that were sitting as spares. So it's a really great year to be doing this because this fleet has less wear and tear. That's part number one. Part number two, and Mr. Leone, I'm not sure if you'll remember off the top of your head, but I think it was like we had $160,000 across 48 buses in 4 years on warranted repairs. And when you divide that per bus per year, it was nowhere near what the warranty would cost. We did talk through the mechanics. There are some more expensive pieces, Chris, that we want to hedge against, and we want to do the comprehensive engine warranty and safeguard ourselves there, but we really feel on some of the ancillary body and chassis pieces that we can pay as we go and we'll come out ahead financially. And it's only for 2 years.
And how are we able to go down 18 buses?
So, go ahead, Dr. Ting.
Well, prior to COVID, we were at 155 drivers. We're currently at 107. We have several drivers driving additional routes. We're combining routes daily. Right now, drivers come to work not knowing exactly where they're going to drive and who they're going to drive for. We don't anticipate growing. I mean, we're going to grow it as fast as we can, but I don't ever see us in the short term being back to that 155. And that's what our original fleet was based upon, 2 years prior, or 2.5 years prior, we'd have been at that 155. We're nowhere near that.
And that's with everyday dedicated route drivers plus a percentage for sub-drivers, like on staff. Right now, we're struggling, obviously, to even fill the daily consistent routes, let alone have ample subs. And so we're down significantly. And so we talked about this in my conversations with Mike Leone. Even if we're able to incrementally grow staffing, some of the labor market changes, if we really recruit hard, do we anticipate moving? We reduced the fleet down to 140. We've struggled to get much ground in terms of staffing. Do we think that we're going to be net plus 23 this time next year? No, we don't. And so I did, just one other point I did not mention, is that would be a great problem to have. If we could be net plus 23 drivers, that would be great. So I did talk with my rep at Midwest and say, you know what, if Rob Schiffbauer finds the silver bullet and can magically hire 30 bus drivers, can we come to you and we got this better deal on these, can we come to you and get, these are used buses we're keeping, do you have more used and refurbished buses? And he said, I have a parking lot full of them. And so that higher price point, that is not, would be my recommendation for 48 of them. If we have to go get 2 or 3 or 4, that is an option. I don't think we're going to need it. I'm confident we won't. But it's there if so.
So the 18 buses, kind of to go off Chris' question, were spare buses. So
we keep spares for when they go down in the shop. Obviously, if they need repairs in a bus.
So if we're down 18, then we still have an adequate amount of cushion. Okay, for that aspect of it.
Yes, just given that our daily drivers are so far down.
I understand.
Yep.
And then does that put additional wear and tear on the remaining fleet, or do the spares get cycled in? How does that work?
Mike, that's a very good question. Mike, can you speak a little bit to the miles on the buses just because of COVID, and then how you rotate those through if our fleet's lighter?
As of right now, we don't rotate the spares in. The spares are there, they're parked, they're ready to go. If a driver's bus has to be in for a service, if it has to go to safety lane, if it breaks down, it goes. We don't necessarily rotate them in. What the staff does is they rotate the buses annually based on the drivers and the routes so that we're spreading our mileage out over the entire fleet. This way we have some buses that are artificially low and some that are up high. So we try to we get 15,000 miles a year from the lease. We try to set it up and put assign buses to routes so that at the end of their life, they're close to max miles.
So by taking these 18 out, this doesn't.
It won't affect that,
compromise
no.
that
No.
math problem, okay. And then I'm gonna go back to one of my favorite subjects, is then does this finally come to a point where we get people to commit to taking bus services? And maybe in some cases, it doesn't have to be the full-sized traditional yellow bus. I mean, I know it's a staffing shortage, just finally bringing this, and maybe a cost of the actual bus, but this is something for the last 6+ years we've talked about, that we end up going all the way out to one corner and going around the neighborhood and nobody's getting on the bus.
So we've Go ahead, Mike, because
Plus gas is going up.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, oh, sure. We now, I mean, as a result of the situation we're in, we have reorganized, combined. We've done everything humanly possible to get as many kids on the bus on each route as possible. Ridership is probably down a little bit because you can tell by going to the schools, the amount of cars that parents are driving their kids right now for obvious reasons. That might ease a little bit down the road. We tried to ask parents to make a hard commitment to take them, and we did have them, but not enough to make a difference. I think at our 3 high schools, it was right around 300 kids a building, and it's not, in our size, it doesn't make that much difference. High school ridership is always lower than elementary school ridership because the kids have other options. But elementary school ridership is still pretty solid.
Any other questions on the school bus lease agreement? So then that will come back next month for approval?
Yeah, this will come back next month, and I'll have the lease agreement attached for your approval.
All right, next up, we have the.
One quick question. Do we get to pick the buses based on our records that we're gonna keep for the extension?
We're already ahead of you on that, yep. So
Okay.
we took a look, and like I said, there were some of these buses that just were spares and have lower miles and
That's
less
what I'm
wear
saying,
and
so
tear.
we get to pick, okay.
Mhm.
They're not gonna come in and say, yeah, that one, no, yes, okay.
No, we're sending back the 18 we want to send back, sir.
All right, we have the community relations report.
Once again, including your backup materials for this evening.
Asset of the month.
Asset of the month for February is young person makes service to others a core value at home. Be a role model to your children by serving others at school. Include service learning as part of the regular school curriculum. In the community, create and publicize service opportunities for youth and families. We're back with our community service this year, and it's good to see students have been turning it in.
District 210 advisory, Beth, anything to report?
So the district advisory committee met and began discussions for the student handbook portion of the dress code. And for the first time since I have been on the advisory committee, we had public comment. And it was the same group of students who spoke at our board meeting about the dress code policy, if you recall, from 2 months ago, right? So the discussions, began. There was a lot of discussion. They were asked to have the administration draft a policy. So nothing further than that, just initial discussions, a request for a draft, and then in February, we will take a look at the draft, review it, and then hopefully be able to move forward in March. Questions? Okay.
Anything on the legislative report?
The only thing I have to report, if people have been following the lawsuit against several districts in the state of Illinois, we were not named in terms of the mask mandate and quarantine. I call it the DeVore lawsuit. In Sangamon County, today the judge heard final arguments and had said her verdict will be released a week from tomorrow, so next Friday. So the question is, what does that mean? Well, it kind of depends upon what the decision is. If in either course, I'm certain it's going to go to appeals. From my perspective, we have our safe return to learn plan in place. It has parameters in there in terms of when we would wear a mask, when we wouldn't. We're following the updated CDC guidance on quarantine for students. The 5 days has been a huge benefit, both to faculty, staff, and teachers. So we'll continue to move forward. If that decision comes next Friday, we'll speak with our attorneys. I'll provide information to the board, and if the board wants to make a different determination at some point, we can, but at this point, it would be my recommendation. We just stay the course and wait for these numbers to come back down. The numbers have started to come back down a little bit. Our attendance numbers have been very good at our schools. We're right between 89 and 92% every day, which is what we would typically be this time of the school year. So, we'll keep moving forward on that. I just wanted to apprise the board of that situation.
All right, Superintendent's District Report.
With a heavy heart that I informed the district that Lisa Parker unexpectedly passed away today. Lisa was a teacher in our math department for the past 26 years. She was a hardworking and loyal colleague, instructor, and friend. She's been an integral part of our school community and will be greatly missed. Our thoughts and prayers are with the Parker family at this difficult time.
Our condolences to her family. Any other district business? Any correspondence?
None tonight.
Okay, with that, I'll entertain a motion to go into a closed session to discuss the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of employees, purchase or lease of real estate, establish sale or lease price of real estate, consider sale or purchase of securities, investments, or investment contracts, and student-related matters. A second? All right. Aye? And there may be action after?
Aye.
There may be action after the meeting, so.
After
After
closed session.
closed session, thank you. Or after, we may take some other action after the meeting. Okay, so we are back in open session, and I will entertain a motion to approve the purchase and sale agreement for the land on 191st as discussed in closed session. Okay, Linda, can you please open the vote?
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
All right, and with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. All right, we're done.
Aye.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Joe. Have a good evening.
Sorry, I was.
Thanks, guys.